Welcome to Sexy Mom Abundant Life with best-selling author and coach Kathy Williams, a show to help you tap into the support of the universe and access the abundance that's available in every area of your life. Listen in for conversations and tools to create more ease, joy, and possibility with family, relationships, business, and living. Kathy's joyful perspective will help you tap into your own wisdom and create a life of presence and abundance your way. Listen live on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, or anytime on iTunes or at IOM FM.
Welcome to Sexy Mom Abundant Life, everyone. This is Kathy Williams, and I have a guest today that I'm thrilled to have a conversation with. Carol Kline is a #1 New York Times bestselling author and just an exceptional individual. She has co-authored more than a dozen books with some people I'm sure you know, Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, Gay Hendricks, Marcy Shimoff, so many amazing books and books that have really touched my life. And I'm just delighted to have Carol here to talk about all things writing. And I know that many of you either have a book in your mind or have something already on the computer. And so I've received some questions from listeners about getting published, getting out in the world, and we're going to talk about that all today. Getting out of your way, even with writing, because I know that's one of the things that occurs a lot. And so welcome to the show, Carol. I'm so grateful to have you here.
Oh, Kathy, I'm so excited to be here with you. You know how much I enjoy your energy and there's so much laughter and joy in your voice that it's so much fun just to be here with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I just heard a little nutshell version of your journey with writing, but I would love to hear, and have listeners hear about maybe your journey and also some of the things that may have come up emotionally for you in relation to writing and being published.
Oh, what a great question. So I want to just tell everybody that you may think, oh, that ship has sailed, I'm 25 or 35 or 45 or 55 or 65. And writing is something that you can launch yourself into at any time in your life. It just requires, for me, it didn't start till I was in my mid-30s. I actually was a cook. I was a private chef and a caterer. And I used to read cookbooks like novels. I would go to the library and take out stacks of cookbooks. And I would read them from front to cover, cover to cover, front to back. And my favorite part was the little blurb before they got into the recipe of, if their mother they'd made it when they were children, or, what wonderful things it was to go shopping for the ingredients or something about it. And I realized, so I wrote a cooking column for about 3 years in the town that I lived in. And then I always had been a voracious reader. So I loved how words moved me. I just was very big fan of books, but the thought that I could write, I had been a literature major. I had analyzed literature, but I had never written anything much. So it came as a great surprise that I wanted to write, that I could write. And I found that I could write basically other people's stories. I had a sensitivity to their voice, their cadence, their rhythms, and I could interview them or take their stories and find the gold in it. And that's how I got into Chicken Soup for the Soul. I wrote other people's stories after interviewing them for Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul. And that was my entree. And I just want to say that many of us, the thing that I notice is that there's this disconnect often between what your gestalt is, your wholeness, your knowingness, your experience. Like what you want to say. You have an experience of something, but then you open your mouth or you put your pen to paper or you put your fingers on the keyboard and it just doesn't come out. It doesn't capture what you want to say. And I love Elizabeth Gilbert. I once heard her speak in Pasadena right after her book about marriage, Committed, came out. And she said, you know, writing, when we write something, it's the imperfect twin of what we have inside. And at some point, we have to send that imperfect twin out into the world, because it's the process of art is taking what's inside. This is not Elizabeth Gilbert. This is another teacher of mine. The process of art is taking what's inside outside without losing anything. And that, my friends, is a tall order. So there's that frustration that you know what you want to say, and then you write, and somehow it doesn't capture it. You have to keep mining that same vein. And the other last piece of advice that I think is really important comes from Ira Glass. And do you know who Ira Glass is? He's a NPR kind of guy, public radio.
Tells great stories.
He tells great stories. But he said, the thing I wish they told me about writing is that your taste outstrips your talent at first. You know, you got into writing because you know what good writing is. You love writing. You love reading good writing. And then when you try and do it, it's usually a disappointment. and people quit. And what it takes some time, even years, a few years of writing regularly. And I can always tell, I wrote regularly for, 20 years. And by the end of that period, the cable between what was inside and what was outside was very well hooked up. But then I took a 5-year break, and so it took a little while to get back into it. So wherever you are in this journey, whether you haven't started, whether you took a break, whether you feel disappointed in your level of talent versus your taste, just know that it is a process, and that you do have to widen the neural pathways from your right side of your brain, from your heart, from your gestalt experience, your wholeness, to the linear delivery system we have called language.
Yeah, and that jump. It can feel like such a jump to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that, you know, cultivation, and you said kind of mining and refining in a way, to me, it seems like we really have to have the knowledge that writing is a valuable activity.
Writing is a process of discovery and personal growth, in my experience. And what I was thinking of, it's not just the destination of finally being able to write, because every time you decide you want to write something, you want to communicate. Writing a book, the best kind of book I find is a one-to-one conversation with a reader. I think you and I had discussed this, that, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, my audience, and your audience is one reader. One person picks up that book and they read it, and it's a conversation between you and that person. And the best kind of writing feels that intimate. It feels like we're across the table from each other, and I'm telling you what I think and what I want you to get from my experience, you know. Or now, see, I'm a nonfiction writer. Actually, what I would call a specific genre called narrative or creative nonfiction. And it's where you take the elements of fiction, dialogue, plotting, character development, and you use them in the service of a nonfiction story. So, you know, it's actually a little easier than fiction because the plot's already there. You don't have to come up with a story, but you have to take that story. And one of the very most famous and sort of first examples that I know of creative nonfiction is Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. That was a news story, and it was a horrific, horrifying, tragic, terrible story about a home invasion and murder, and he made it like a thriller. And that is, you know, sort of how that genre could be understood. I don't remember where I was going with that thought, but I hope I answered your question.
No, I think it's so valuable to see the reader as the audience as one reader. And I remember taking a course online. What's the name of it? It's through Masterclass, and it was James Patterson. the author James Patterson teaching about writing, and he said, when I write a book, I see a woman across from me, and I'm writing it to her. He said, and I choose a woman because I know 85% of the people who read my books are women. And I sort of have the sense of who she is and what she's interested in, and how this book would sort of, you know, invite her in, and you know, I think a lot of us, when we're writing, we don't get that specific about who am I writing to. And it sounds like such a valuable thing, including for me, as I write, I feel like I'm writing to myself as a younger person. Like, this is what I wish someone had conveyed to me. Yeah, and I know who you are because I've been that. Yeah.
And it's funny, there's an apocryphal story about Warren Buffett that every New Year's he writes a shareholder letter about what has happened in the year before in Berkshire Hathaway, his company. And he changes one word and then sends it out. Do you know what that one word is?
No.
He writes it to his sister Jane. So instead of saying Dear Jane, it says Dear Shareholder. Wow. So it's very much like James Patterson and what we've been talking about. You think of a person, I love the idea of writing to your younger self, writing to someone that you love, that you care about. And if you're going to write a self-help book, I think that's a beautiful place and a beautiful way to do it, to come from and to do it, because oftentimes if you're feeling, you have to connect. This is another big piece of the puzzle for writing anything where you want to help somebody else. You've had a transformation. You know, older Kathy wants to talk to younger Kathy. But if older Kathy comes from where she is without building a ramp to where younger Kathy is, they're going to miss each other. So sometimes you have to, the very most important part of the beginning of any book, a self-help book or that kind of book, is to establish a rapport, is to establish a relationship, is to talk to the person from where they are at the beginning of the transformation. Because you have to remember that is, you're not going to help them if you don't take them hold them by the hand and take them step by step from where they are to where you are.
And how do you get into that space? Because what I see with a number of the people I know who would like to write a book or are thinking about it or have started a book is they continually feel like, well, their knowledge is expanding, so then they have to start from this new place or this new place where, like, now I know more, so I need to teach about that, instead of, wait, your reader doesn't know 3 steps back.
Yeah, that is the biggest problem, is that people tend to make jumps that are already enmeshed in their reality. So that's why you need an editor. I always tell people that the sign they should have over their desk should read, "That's nice, but why should I care?" So really, what is in it? Unless you're going to write just a cathartic book that's your experience you want to get on paper, it doesn't matter how it lands. But what is the takeaways? I would start by writing down what you want someone to take away from this book. What is it that you have to learn? I have a friend, she's 3'8", I think. She's a little person. Her name is Peggy O'Neill, and she wrote a book called Walking Tall, and Ways to Overcome Inner Smallness No Matter Your Size. And so her takeaways were, what is it like, to live a life where you're categorized as different or disabled? And she had so many beautiful things, but she knew her takeaways before she started. And that will really help guide you, whether they're advanced or basic, and do your takeaways build on each other? Or is it just a toolbox that you can just give them, choose some of these? We're talking about self-help books. There are also what I would call inspirational or instructional memoirs, where you're sharing a story and the takeaways are implicit. You had to learn it. And so you talk about your learnings and your takeaways, and the reader gets them from your story.
So, that really makes me want to read Peggy's book now. so once you've kind of selected what you want to, or deciphered what you want your readers to learn, are you a person who more works from an outline, or sort of allows the book to like intuitively come together? Or I think there's a lot of curiosity about the organizational process of being a writer. Oh.
This is something that I feel so strongly about. And I happen to be someone who is intellectual and who's analytical. But I do feel, having worked with so many writers, that the worst possible thing you can do is just start writing without some sort of filing system, is what I call it, of what, your outline can change. But the outline is where you get what I call the clarity piece. If you do not have clarity about what you're trying to communicate, it's very difficult to communicate. So you need to start with some sort of outline of what your takeaways are, do they depend on each other, some organizational structure. But then, given that skeleton, given that filing system, you can wake up in the morning and be inspired to write about anything, and then you have a place to put it. As a matter of fact, I really recommend that people ask themselves questions before they go to bed at night. Pose a question that you kind of aren't sure the answer to, or you're not, or even if you do know the answer to it, just ask, how can I best, I would have problems writing. I wrote Happy for No Reason was my first book, self-help book, and Love for No Reason was my second.
And it's a great book.
I loved both of those. And it was my first book. It was very difficult. I'd always written those stories where the plot was there, and I was just writing the best way to relate that story. This was actually first draft of a self-help book. And I would go to bed saying, how am I going to tell people about that? And while I was sleeping, the little elves in my head, the little subconscious elves would do work, and I would get up and I would run, not walk to my computer, and I would do what I call morning journaling or morning thoughts. And I would just type, and I would start just by like X's and O's. It was just nothing, just gibberish. And all of a sudden, what was in would just pour out in the page. And most of it was unusable, but there would be 3 lines, 2 sentences, 1 phrase that was so remarkable that had just sort of come through me. And I could put that where it belonged. But I find that people they say, I have all these journals, I have all these blogs, I have all these diaries, I have all these transcripts of interviews. It's not going to cut it. You need to have the map from above, looking at where you want to go. And then if you feel like going through there, you can have somebody, if you want to, take the transcription and put, okay, this is anything to do with that topic or anything to do with that topic. But you'll save yourself a lot of heartache and a lot of work and a lot of frustration if you sit down and get the clarity piece first. As a matter of fact, I recommend you write a book proposal, even if you're not going to have it traditionally published, if you're going to publish it yourself. And the book proposal has a very wonderful clarifying effect. Who's the book for? And then what are the chapters, what order, chapter summaries, very informal. Can be an informal book summary, book proposal. And always subject to change. Right? Absolutely. And that's the beauty about outlines, is they aren't rigid. They give you structure, but within that structure, there's spontaneity, there's channeling, there's magic, there's inspiration, there's the muse, and all of it can be used and harvested. This is so delicious because I feel like a lot of people, I can hear them as you're talking about an outline and some structure. I hear some people like, oh, but where's the inspiration within that? And it's so present. It's not as though these two things are at odds. They very much work hand in hand. Like as a parent, yes, a child requires some structure, but then there's also I show up and respond to what's present, and I receive inspiration to do things with that child that maybe aren't set out in that structure, but that fit in. So exactly. Yeah. If you're going to take on a delivery system of some knowledge or story, the delivery system has a structure. So if you don't care about it making it to the other end, then it doesn't matter. But if you do, then you really have to adhere to some sort of structure of the book, and that will require linear thinking. It's a linear delivery system. Sorry.
Well, and other people are probably like, awesome, that's what I need to hear,
Yeah.
So I'm just curious because you mentioned the word file. Do you actually have files, like physical files for each chapter, or?
No, I don't. I'm not a real good paper person because things get lost. But I do have, when I write a book, I tend to have a master document, and then I throw anything into that document under the chapter, or I'll have chapter 3 notes, and then anything like I'm writing Conscious Luck came out in May. And I told you I'm writing an e-course, sort of where Conscious Luck leaves off. After writing the book, sending it to the publisher, and then writing articles and doing 100 interviews and listening to how people talk about it, doing question and answer calls. I own such a bigger piece of what this means and how it lands for people and what they need to really make this come alive and apply it in their lives. So where Conscious Luck, the book, leaves off, Conscious Luck, the e-course, it starts. And now, so there's a file that says Conscious Luck e-course on my computer, and I'll be reading something. And like just the other day, there was an amazing article by Richard Branson about how to find out what you want to do in your life. And I'll just click on that, I'll capture the URL, and I'll put it in that document under chapter 4, which is the goals section. And so I have chapter 8, chapter 4. I had this beautiful, there was a meme on Facebook of this little girl, and she says, "You can't talk butterfly language to caterpillar people." And that's about finding your lucky circle, your lucky community. So there's just everything. When your reticular activating system, when your brain has been primed to look for things for your book, you'll find them everywhere. So just have it ready to throw it in there. And later, when you're ready to focus on it, you have all these little scraps to make a beautiful quilt.
That's so great. Yeah. Because the organization, I know, for a lot of people is just like, oh my, how do I even start? I want to make this thing, and there are 12 chapters, and like, how do I get organized and keep track of all of that? So Another hint that I just remembered that might help even when you're doing the outline is to get those larger Post-it notes. They're about this big, and then the Post-it pads. And Marcy and I used to she had a huge picture window with a view, and we would write points down. Then we could move them around within the chapter, and we could move the chapters around. We would just play with this. Oh, how fun.
It was really great. So you'd write one takeaway and where does it go? Okay, chapter 1. You just put all the chapter 1 takeaways there. And then you would what order do they go in? It was really great. If you're a visual person and also it gives you the flexibility. I can't imagine now writing out in pen. They say it organizes your thoughts and it's great. So I might do some journaling, but the idea of I love cutting and pasting and, so the visual, the physical cut and paste is those Post-it notes.
Yeah, that's huge for me to be able to see something, and the computer is a beautiful, beautiful, piece of a tool to use, and at the same time, for me, it's not that quite as visual and it's all in front of me, it's all here, and I can take this piece and stick it there. Yeah. So in terms of using the computer, is there software or writing apps or things that you like to use? Or
I'm kind of old school. I tried for a while to do Dragon app. That was one of the first, that'll really date me. That was one of the first speaking. And also I want to tell people that a speaking app for writing, I have a problem with it because we don't write the way we speak. You do want to be conversational. That is definitely true. And if you want to write down notes, you're out on your walk and you want to make a voice memo of some idea you have, But in general, writing does something different. It helps you organize things. That delivery system, again, is different. If you're a speaker, then fine, get up there and speak to people. But don't think that you can just dictate your book. And you might be able to dictate a rough draft. I'm okay with that, a first draft. But then you're going to have to go in and write it the way written language works. Just saying.
I'm laughing at this because I did a workshop and the participants were like, please make this into a book. This really needs to be a book. So I, was going to have it transcribed. And I looked at the language and I was just like, oh my God, I have so many run-ons or don't complete the sentence or, it's just, it was fabulous in terms of a workshop, a spoken thing, but having that become a very, very rough draft is all it was. Yeah. Oh, Carol, I'm so enjoying this conversation. So I look forward to being back with you in just a couple of minutes.
Feed your soul with waves of consciousness on Om Times Radio. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Hey everyone. Thanks for listening to Sexy Mom Abundant Life. I'm so grateful you're here. As a listener, you can pop over to meetkathywilliams.com and get 20% off any item in the shop, including videos, energy pulls, even private sessions, by entering the code SMRadio. Also at meetkathywilliams.com, you can download a free Create Your Life exercise and join me for online classes and Hawaii retreats. And if you're stuck, helping you get unstuck is my specialty. I'd love to work with you one-on-one.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Together, that's so sweet.
Welcome back to Sexy Mom Abundant Life. This is Kathy Williams, and today I'm having conversations about writing with author Carol Kline. And it's such a delight to have you on the show, Carol.
So happy to be here with you.
Thank you. So we've been talking about writing and getting organized, and I have one question that's that one more question about that in terms of love for no reason. And that's one of the books that you co-wrote with author Marcy Shimoff. And in the book, you say that you had hundreds of interviews and thousands of pages worth of material. And it's sort of like, yeah, I can see your face. So when you have so much information, how does that come into something? And you already talked about having an outline, but to bring it into a cohesive, finished product?
Well, I always tell people you may have more than one book in you. So don't try and do too many things with one book. For Marcy and me, what happened that helped us winnow down all those interviews and all of that material was the length of the book we wanted to write, given our publishers, and then just the categories. Each chapter had a certain goal. We had an overarching organizational principle. For us, it was the chakras in Love for No Reason. In Happy for No Reason was building a home. So there was the 4 walls and the roof and the garden, the foundation. So we found a way to organize everything. And then there were things that were what we wanted to say. And some people's interviews really, their stories really exemplified that. It illustrated our principles. Sometimes it was just one line in somebody's story. For instance, in Conscious Luck, I interviewed more people than we had room for stories. But I would find, like, there was one person who talked about integrity, and she talked about making an integrity move. And I love that concept of, she knew she was making an integrity move when the world would all of a sudden, sort of rise to meet her. She would find, and it was just exactly what we were talking about, that being true to your values would create more luck in your life. And so, I didn't get to tell her whole story, but I got to include, I talked about her, and I said, in our interview, she said this. So there were times when you could do anecdotes and so forth. You try and include, and for me and Marcy as well, Gay's a different story. I've been the co-writer with many very established thought leaders and motivational speakers, and I tend to be just a scribe. I don't really feel that I have that much expertise, or I didn't in the past. And what I always feel like is you can be an expert, or you can be the student chronicling your own journey. So supposing if you want to learn about Tibetan Buddhism, okay, maybe that's your thing, then you interview people and you go to classes and it's like that 5-year-old that comes home and tells his preschool little sister, 1, 2, 3, you teach what you've learned. It actually makes you you're closer to the student mentality. You're closer to the beginner mind. And that's what happens sometimes with experts, is they forget about that ramp you have to build that we were talking about in the last section, that if you don't have a relationship with your reader, if you're talking down to them and just not really being aware of how what you're saying is going to affect them. I mean, you can't obviously with a book know who's reading it and what their experience is, but in the person that you're writing to, that one person that we talked about earlier that you want to give things to, you have to take into effect that you have to take into, the word I can't think of, you have to take into, anyway, you have to think of it, that they have their reality, and you have to acknowledge that. You have to take that into consideration.
As you were saying that, sometimes you're just the student and not just, right? Sometimes you're the student chronicling your own journey. It felt like that just takes the burden off a lot of people, because they say, who am I to be the expert? Why would people listen to me? And it's like, we don't acknowledge that we have learned something and that is valuable and it's changed us in some way. And so we would like to share it.
Yes, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun, but your vantage point, no one has ever had your particular vantage point. And I tell people there's someone on their knees somewhere waiting for you to explain how it happened to you and how how your insight into it will help them.
That is so important to know. Yeah. Yeah, and keep in mind, even some authors like Deepak Chopra or in some cases Wayne Dyer, they're taking information that's out there already and they're speaking it in a new voice, which is very relatable. Yeah. And so it's not like all of us must have something that's excessively, new or downloaded from God or whatever. It's like your voice, your perspective is so valuable. So thank you
were
that.
Downloaded from God just for the purpose of your perception and your awareness and your consciousness. I mean, there'll be a time, I'm sure, where we'll be able to put a disc into our heads, download what's there, put that into your head. You can experience it, but until then, the only way you can share your consciousness, your experience, is through words, through communication, through visual. I mean, in the written world, in the book world.
And it's so incredible that we can do that, right? Considering I'm trying to filter, give you an experience of what I've experienced, and you come with the completely different experiences, and it's coming in through the filter of all of that. And
right.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so important. I talk about this. I put together a writing course in 2011 or something, 2012, and I taught it for a few years, and then I taped it, and it's available in the condensed form now. But what I really noticed was that people didn't know that their stories would be so powerful. That your story, the way you help someone understand things, is by you telling your story. But your story has to be where as if they were there. You can't sort of, the art of storytelling is as if you were, if you made your story into a film, would there be action or just a talking head? That's a really important aspect. So there's a great example, I don't know if we have time, I'll tell you that I was writing Chicken Soup for the Veteran Soul, and it was a really wonderful experience. My husband is a Vietnam vet, and I wanted to honor his service, and some of the most beautiful stories, when people are under that level of duress and stress, sometimes the best of humanity comes out, the worst and the best. And there's a story about a man named Elgin Staples, and he had been in in the Pacific Theater in World War II on an aircraft carrier. And the men had to wear life belts. They didn't have life jackets. Those were too cumbersome, but life belts, because at any moment their ship could be torpedoed and they could be thrown overboard. And that is, in fact, what happened to Elgin. The carrier was torpedoed. He was thrown into the ocean, and he had to wait for one of three things to happen. 1, to get eaten by a shark, or 2, to be picked up by the enemy, or 3, to be picked up by the Allies. And as he waited in that highly nervous, anxious, life or death situation, he was just waiting. And luckily he got picked up by the Allies. He was sent home to his home in Michigan, and he was sitting around the kitchen table with his mother. And he was telling her about what it was like to be in the ocean waiting for one of those three things to happen. He said, I was so freaked out. I was so worried. I read the life belt. I just read the directions on the life belt over and over and over again, just to keep my mind off of my worry. He said, I memorized it. I even remember my inspector number. And he said his inspector number. And his mother's eyes, she looked at him, she said, son, you don't know. I got a job during wartime at the Firestone plant down the road. That's my inspector number. Shivers? Anybody got shivers? And so
yes.
At that moment, when I was interviewing him, I said, what happened? And he said, we freaked out. I said, Elgin, if I was a mouse in the corner, what would I have seen? And he said, well, I stood up. My mother's tears were streaming down her face. I stood up. I walked around to her. I took her hands and I lifted her up. And I put my arms around her, and she put her arms around me, the same arms that had gone around halfway around the world to save me. Okay, That's very different than we freaked out. You feel the impact. So sometimes all of that was inside of him, but he just used, this 4 words, we freaked out, or 3 words, we freaked out, and it doesn't convey anything. But when you talk about the physicality of what happened, so I can see it, I can feel it, I can hear it, like I'm a fly on the wall, like I'm a mouse, then it becomes so much more powerful. So that was some of the things that I learned as a Chicken Soup for the Soul co-authors. You say we freaked out and you don't really see anything, but if you detail the physical action, look what you've done. You've created a little movie scene.
It's brilliant. I mean, I teared up with your, as you spoke that, whereas we freaked out. I mean, that could be, I lost my car keys and freaked out.
Yeah, there's no specificity. There's nothing that it really conveys. And most people don't understand that you have to deconstruct, reverse engineer your experience to allow other people to have the same experience. And I got great training as a Chicken Soup for the Soul co-author. I did many collections of stories before writing my first self-help book to learn about how to do that.
Wow. And what a practice that must be. Just, I interviewed a woman, the author of The Middle Finger Project, recently, and she said what she does is she writes an email, and she said each email takes her about 2 hours, because she first writes an email, just whatever comes out, and then she says, okay, how do I make this more real? How do I put this into my words? How do I paint a picture with this line? And she goes through line by line, like, how do I make it more interesting? What would help people? What would evoke an emotion here? And she said, a lot of people would say 2 hours for one email, but this is how I make my money. By touching people in such a way that they're compelled to open my emails and read them and give me money for one thing or another.
Yeah. Well, she's a smart woman, because this is the sort of bottom line dictum for writing is show, don't tell. And that's how you show, is that you evoke emotion. You very, very, very faithfully try and recreate a physical, concrete experience for someone. And then you can go too far, how it smelled, how it felt, too much description. But you have to, it's such an art. You have to find just enough description to make it real, and just not too much that it gets tedious.
Well, and that's one thing that struck me about Conscious Luck. It was so brilliant is the simplicity of it. And also that it did convey, it did paint pictures, it did evoke a feeling. And because I would look at it and I would say, I know a lot of this stuff. And they put it together in such it's almost like a nourishing meal.
That's
so artfully done.
Well, it's a really, really, really good skill. And one of the most important is to learn to explain things simply. And I used to think it was an Einstein quote. And when I tried to find this Einstein quote, it doesn't exist. So whoever said it, thank you. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And what I find is that as I go back, I consider editing. You write crap. That's the most important part. Mind dump, emotion dump, get it out on paper. Doesn't matter. If you try and edit while you're writing, it's over. Never going to happen. But if you just give yourself permission to write, as Anne Lamott says, shitty first draft. Sorry if I'm not supposed to say that word, but bad first draft. Thank you. I didn't know. Bad first draft. And then you go back, and I consider it like, if you're a woodworker, you sand until there's no rough spots. You read it over, and you also have to have somebody else, after you've done your best, to take out excess words, take out excess ideas, keep it simple. I do feel like Conscious Luck is the shortest book I've ever written. Completely. I'm shocked. Look at it. It's teeny tiny. And it's so spare. Everything in there deserves its place. I had to cut to the bone, because there was fluff, and it didn't add. And it's a real art to explain things simply. And don't worry about it. That's not your first job. That's not your first job. Your first job is to explain it very unsimply, to just write down whatever comes to you, to mine your experience in your heart, in your brain, in its entirety, in all the little pieces. Shake out that bag with all the lint and the old tissues and the lifesavers, and then go through it, and you'll find a jewel in there.
So it strikes me as you say that you didn't consider yourself a writer. You cooked, and what helped you realize that this was a valuable activity, that this was something worth doing and refining and mining? And
it's an interesting question. There was something incredibly joyful. My first experience was that I'm a researcher. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a librarian, a research librarian. I thought that would be the most wonderful way to spend one's life, helping people find the information they needed. And so as I grew up, I became a woman and a wife and a stepmother, and I did all these things. And I never once thought I could write. I loved reading, and I knew what good writing was, and I admired it. And then I was asked to research stories for Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul. My girlfriend, Marcy Scheimoff, who was my college bestie, got that contract and asked me to help her. She knew how much I loved library research. And this was the days before Google.
Oh, wow.
No Google. There was no internet. It was mid-90s. And I would go to the library and look at magazines and newspapers, and I found stories of inspiring women. And I thought, well, now what do I do? I can't just plagiarize this, rewrite this story. I thought, okay, I'm going to find these women, interview them, and write it in their voice. That was my idea. So I found them through some detective work, that also no internet, remember? And I would interview them and write it in their, and I found I had a talent for that. I could write in their voice, and it wasn't my voice. Each story was different. But the first experience I had was I would, interview them, and I would tell the story right away. I used to walk every day with a girlfriend, with my dog and her dog. And I would just tell the story. And telling the story gives you a sense of the story arc, the story thread. And you find out where people glaze over and where they're interested. And it helps you to organize your story. So I would tell the story, and then I would go home and write it down as I, told it. I'd already done the notes. But then I would just get very, very, very clear on what I wanted to say, what I wanted this story to do. And it worked out so much that I decided it was so blissful. The first line, I would just meditate. I meditate every day for twice a day since I was 15, so 45 years or something. I would sit, and the very first line would just come through me. And it was always something really cool. I interviewed Stephen Covey for a book called You've Got to Read This Book. 55 people tell the story of the book that changed their life. And he told me about his home life and how beautiful it was. He was so, the first line, I grew up swimming in a sea of love. And he said, it goes, oh my God, that is so perfect. And it's just kind of fun. You just put yourself in their experience. So writing became such a joy. And then I got deadlines and money. So that's where, you know what I mean? It wasn't the muse anymore. And I really, really enjoyed the process, the challenge of writing stories. And that's what I did for the first 10 years until I started writing Happy for No Reason. That was my first experience writing a self-help book.
I love this. There's so much more we can dive into here. And we do have some questions about publishing, which is an industry that has changed so much over the past decade. So, there are some readers have submitted questions about how do you promote a book? How do you reach people and let them know it's available?
Well, okay, so the traditional publishing or self-publishing. Self-publishing, I really think, is the way to go. if you can get a traditional publisher, they don't really give you advances much anymore. We used to get huge advances, and that was always really helpful. But you don't get that anymore. They don't have the money. They don't have, because of the same thing that happened to the music industry, happened to the publishing industry. They have no control. There's pirated, it's, it's creator consumer, there's YouTube, there's Spotify, all this stuff where it's very hard for the original artist to get paid, to control, the product. And so what other happened is that the media became fragmented. So it used to be that if you got on Oprah, if you were on Good Morning America, the publisher would find ways to put you in front of people. Now, the internet has leveled that playing field. There's no gatekeeper, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing is that really terrible books get written, uploaded to Amazon, and they have lowered the bar for what it means to write a book. I am the antithesis of write your book in a weekend. Sorry, I don't believe that is going to get you the best book. It may get you a calling card. It may get you something, but true thought and true processing and true heartfelt owning of your material is what will make a book work for people and land and really have legs. It's what it's called when it gets passed around. So that's what you want for your book, that your book is so good that people tell other people about it. And you have now the option. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have YouTube. There's so many different ways for you to reach what you would call your super fans. I actually, this came out in 2012. There was an article called 1,000 True Fans, which is how our musician, the guy was talking, Kevin Kelly was talking about how in the age of internet, in the age of, this new reality, how do you make a living as an artist? And he said, you get 1,000 true fans who will give you $5, $6, $10, $100 a year, and then you live on that. And so you have to nurture a community. You have to find your community. You have to nurture that community. So how you market your book is you find people who are interested in that book, and then you amplify that. You go to, like, if your book is a historical fiction novel, right? Then you find other people who are reading books who love historical fiction, and you contribute to that group. And you put your book out and get one person to like it and give it to 7 other people. And you have to build it organically, and you have to make it go viral. That's what you're looking for, is the ability to make something go viral. And that's what I have to say about that.
Oh, I'm sure there's more. And our time. Where can people find you, and also your writing course, Carol?
CarolKline.com has more information about me and how to reach me, and also a link to my writing course, which is a 4 modules. It's very digestible, and you get a lot of what I've recommended in worksheets and transcripts and all kinds of fabulous things that are not very expensive, and I think it's really worth the investment in your book.
Wonderful. And we'll post the link below. And it's been such a delight to have you on air today,
Always.
Carol.
Thank you
so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. You can find me at meetkathywilliams.com and the show on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud.